In the next edition of It's About Money, my guest will be Paul Cassarino, president of the GEM Lab. We're going to talk about a lot of brilliant items. Come join us for the next edition of It's About Money. Hello and welcome to another edition of It's About Money. I'm Nannette Nocon and thank you for joining us. I'm delighted that my guest today is Paul Cassarino, who is the president of the GEM Lab. Paul, welcome to the show. I appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So your business has been around since 1958. Tell us about the history of the GEM Lab.
Yeah, my father started the business in 1958. He, as a young boy, he had been exposed to the jewelry industry when he went to buy a fountain pen as he was going to enter high school. And the jeweler that was going to sell him the fountain pen took a liking to him and allowed him to come and sort of learn the trade. And that started his journey in the world of jewelry. And after he graduated high school and went to the Navy, he decided to open up his own business. And in downtown Rochester, he opened a small office. And he was the jeweler's jeweler. He didn't really have many customers of his own, but he did the jewelry work for most of the independent and chain jewelry stores in the Rochester area. And we did that for about 25 years until our own clientele grew to the point that we no longer had to do work for other jewelry stores. By the time we stopped doing what we call trade work in the early 1980s, we were doing the work of about 70 jewelry stores from as far north as Watertown, as far south as Myra and Binghamton, and all the way over to Buffalo. So jewelers of all different types, independent and chain stores, and the jewelry departments of department stores would send their work to the GEM Lab. We would do it there and then send it all back out. But by the early 80s, I said to my dad, I said, Dad, you know, we're charging $4 to do this repair, and it takes us sometimes 90 or 120 days to get repaid by the company. I said, how about if we charge our own customers $15 and get paid the same day? He says, good idea. And that was the start of the transition from doing trade work to doing just retail work. We chose at that point in time to not reduce our staff. Even though we had the largest jewelry concern of its type in the area, we chose to keep it that way to give the Rochester area customers a level of service they really couldn't find elsewhere. So that was the beginning of it. By the early 80s, I worked enough in the GEM Lab as a teenager that I was interested in gemology. My father was the first gemologist in the Rochester area in 1957. I was the second 25 years later. I really enjoyed studying gemology, learning how to identify gemstones and grade them, understand where they come from. So I got 2 degrees in gemology in the early 80s and have used that through my career to help my customers understand the type of things that they're buying. I've always enjoyed personally the detective aspect of gemology. When someone brings something to me that's unknown and they want to know what it is, the collecting of data and measurements and trying to figure out what something is very interesting.
Oh, cool. Is there a local school for gemology?
No, the main school for gemology, the Gemological Institute of America, is based in California. In the early 80s, I did my education through what we call correspondence, through the mail. So it took a couple of years to do that. Now they do it online. You're just as we are now with a Zoom call, you can do training that way. Or you can choose to go to California or New York City for 6 months and do an intense studying and leave as a gemologist.
I see. What does an FGA title mean? What is FGA?
The FGA is the Fellow of the Gemological Association of Great Britain. Now, that's a very difficult title. It's as high as we can go in the world of gemology. Let me give you an example. When I studied my American degree at the GIA, my final exam was 100 questions, multiple choice and true false. And as most typical exams in the US are, people are very used to that. When a year later, when I went to did my studies through Great Britain, the final exam was 6 questions, 3 in part A and 3 in part B. In part A, I could pick 2 of the questions, and in part B, I could pick 2 of the questions. So I had 4 essay questions to answer and 8 hours to do it. So it was a completely different way of learning and testing to prove what you know. I was very lucky because question number one for me wasn't even a question, it was a command. It was discuss Ruby. And thank God I loved Ruby because I wrote 16 pages in my composition book before I went to number two. If they had said discuss turquoise, a paragraph or two, that would have been it. But the title FGA is something I'm very, very proud of because it's so difficult to attain. And my colleagues and other people in the industry, when they see that on my badge, when I go to a show or something in our industry, it does command a bit of respect. I'm very, very proud of it.
That's great. That's great. And you're also a certified appraiser of personal property, right? Is that common for an FGA to be also?
No, it's not. The world of gemology really isn't about value. It's about identification, the science of mineralogy and gemology to identify a gemstone. In the early 80s, after getting my degrees in gemology, I realized that I didn't really know the history or the study of valuation. So that's when I approached the International Society of Appraisers based in Chicago. I chose that organization because a colleague of mine who was also an FGA and I respected was a member of that organization. So I joined that organization to learn the theory and methodology of valuation. And after a few years studying with them, it was early 1990, I was in Chicago for their annual their annual conference. And I offered to give a talk on using the computer to do appraisals. Because in the 70s and 80s, they were still using typewriters to write appraisals. So I offered to do a little seminar on using WordPerfect and macros to ease the process of developing a multi-page appraisal. So in the morning, with the whole group got together, it was almost 300 people for a talk by the IRS. And then after that talk, we were to break up into gems and jewelry, machinery and equipment, antiques and residential contents, and so on, different types, and fine art. And each group would have its own presentation. Well, I went to my room and I was expecting a group of about 35 people. Instead, the entire conference came to my room because everybody was so interested in learning about using the computer to do appraisals. So fortunately, the talk went very well. The board of directors came up to me afterwards and said, how'd you like to teach? So that's what began my career in teaching appraisal theory and methodology with the International Society of Appraisers. So my students are not just gemologists. They could be collectors of antiques. They could be experts in samurai swords, machinery and equipment. The item that they're appraising, that's their job to understand. My job was to teach them how to research value and how to understand different types of value. And I enjoyed that, did that for many, many years.
See, very nice. That background. Now, there are many services they offer. You used to work with other jewelers, but now you work with your own customers. What are the services that you offer compared to a typical, another type of jeweler? Help me define the differences there.
Yeah, what's different about the Gem Lab? Most jewelry stores are just stores. They sell a product. They, giftware and earrings and necklaces and things like that. That's the majority of mom and pop jewelry stores are like that. What's different about the Gem Lab is we specialize not only in those items, but also custom made jewelry, where we can create something from the customer's idea and make it from scratch. We do a lot of repair and modification, especially antique jewelry restoration is one of our specialties. These are things that a lot of typical jewelry stores don't handle. They don't have the expertise or the wherewithal to do it, but I've got a very, very experienced staff that allows us to offer to do these kinds of things for the consumer.
Oh, nice. That's great. I didn't realize that there was a specialty. I met someone before about maybe 5-6 years ago and says, you mean you don't have a jeweler? Like, oh, I never thought of that. Anyway, but great to have, especially if people are caring for their jewelry and family heirloom and stuff like that. So there's a question I have about lab-grown diamond. What is that?
Lab-grown diamond is really nothing new. They've been made in the laboratory since the 1960s. What is new is they're finally able to make them clear and basically flawless, suitable for use in jewelry. For most of the years that they were around, they're simply industrial. But now a diamond can be created in a matter of weeks in the laboratory instead of literally billions of years in the earth. making them far, far, far less expensive. They're identical to natural diamonds in every way except their cost and the fact that they have no rarity. So everybody knows that grandma's diamond is worth more today than what grandpa paid for it. That's because diamonds get more valuable over time. They're a scarce resource. Lab-grown diamonds, there's no rarity to them. In fact, they're going down in price. Every few years, they get less and less expensive. But they're just as beautiful.
And from an eye of someone who's not an expert, like I'm not an expert, would I be able to differentiate between the lab-grown diamond and?
Actually, Nannette, I can't even differentiate a lab-grown diamond using just my eyes. A microscope and my eyes, there's nothing for me to see because it is a diamond. All legitimately sold laboratory-grown diamonds have the words lab-grown etched right on the edge of the diamond. So someone with a 10-power loupe can actually examine the diamond and see that it says lab-grown. But if that word was erased, there's no way for me to tell using just my eyes that it's lab-grown. There's other tests that I can do in the laboratory that tells me it's lab-grown, but just my eyes alone, there's nothing to see.
Wow. Wow. And so tell me about any challenges you had during the pandemic. You know, everybody had to stay away. And what was the biggest challenge and how did you?
The biggest challenge was we do so much one-on-one work with our customers. They bring their jewelry to us, their trusted articles, and we fix it for them and they want to get it back. It's not something we can really do remotely. And the time that we were closed for those several months, I had been making wedding bands for hundreds of clients. So I was coming into the store every day or two and through the back door, giving people their wedding bands for those March, April, May, June weddings that we've been making. We had no idea when we'd open again. So we had to get those rings to the people as quickly as we could. That was a bit of a challenge, but we got through it.
Oh, that's great. I'm sure the customers appreciated that. Now, what do you see the future will be? It might transition the company from working with other jewelers and to your own personal customers. What do you see the future of the Gem Lab?
Well, I've been doing this now for 45 years, and I rightfully should be looking toward the end of my career, and I'm trying to find ways to simplify what we do because so much of what we do is custom, and you just can't simplify custom. If it's custom, it's custom. So I'm training more and more of my staff, and the third generation, my niece, is part of the Gem Lab as well. She's a gemologist too, and she's learning the techniques that my father taught me, so that down the road someday, I'll be able to sit down and relax a bit while she takes the business to the next level.
Nice. That's great to have a family. You know, a lot of families, there's infighting and the business falls apart. So that's very impressive that
Not
you're moving on to the third generation. Yeah, that's great. What would you say is the secret with that? How do you make it work?
Respect. The respect I had for my father, his respect for me, the way we treat each other shows our staff that we care about each other and care about them. Respect goes a long way toward business success.
Yeah.
Probably the biggest thing that my father taught me early on was not to borrow money. My father never borrowed a penny his entire business career. We've never done so either with the Gem Lab. So it gives me a great deal of flexibility to do what I want because I can afford to do it.
Very nice. That's great. I love the traditional values and how that's continued your success. And I noticed they have a website, which is wonderful, which most businesses need to do that, right? And it's terrific. So I wish you the very best in terms of, you know, continued success and passing on to your next generation. And I appreciate you talking about FGA title and what that's about, as well as the certified appraiser and a little bit glimpse of the jewelry business. So thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody today.
Thank you. And thank you, our guest, for joining us today. My guest was Paul Cassarino, president of the Gem Lab. Until next time, I'm Nannette Nocon, and it's about money.